Lou George.
All right, I guess we're ready to get started. Are you guys ready for me to start talking? Well, as you all know, I'm Major Lee Baker, your instructor for Military Science 201, and kind of gave you a heads up a few weeks ago that we would be having a special presentation today. What I did was I put out a call to all BSU, for all the staff and faculty who work here, and then even some folks in the community found out that we were requesting veterans to come in and share their experiences with us. And I've given them some questions to kind of guide their thought process. We have also with us today, after I introduce them, we have Mr. Wood from the library here at Ball State University. And he is working on a project with the Veterans History Project. And it is, the project came out of the Library of Congress, specifically the American Folklife Center, to archive veterans, what you all have been through, what's going on in your lives now. Mr. Wood told me the other day that veterans are dying at the rate of 1,300 a day. And no one is out there archiving, getting their tales, your lessons learned, to share for history's sake. So they're cataloging this, going to archive it, and a copy of this will be kept in the Library of Congress. We do see that some folks are taking advantage, and they're coming back now after retirement, and they're writing about their experiences in the services in Vietnam. In fact, last week, retired Brigadier General Shelton was here with a story that he wrote about one of his heroes, which was a man from Muncie. And he was down at the bookstore. I know, Mr. Mann, you went to that. And then we have movies coming out such as We Were Soldiers, which again, people who now feel that they're free to share their experiences without any strings attached. I guess they're coming out of the closet and sharing those experiences. So some of you all might be motivated to do that one day. So what we're going to do today is, these gentlemen have taken time off from their jobs to come in here and to share with you all some concerns, some questions, some ideas, and to help us in Ball State ROTC to mentor you as future leaders. So as we go through this, the types of questions that they're initially going to do, they're going to introduce themselves, what they do now, their current occupation, their military experiences, the impact that the military has had on them, and I haven't guided them and told them it has to be positive. You might hear some really nasty stuff coming out about their experiences in the military, but that's okay. There's still lessons learned that they're veterans and they're free to share. Any guidance that they would like to share with you all or anybody else, since this is going to be recorded, and then we'll have a period for you to ask them individually any questions as we go through this. There were some more folks who could not make it today due to some problems. Dr. Jack Westcott was going to make it, but he couldn't make it. Mr. Barton and a few others could not make it. So what I'll do is, first of all, we have Dr. Mitch Whaley here. Is it Whaley?
Right.
I'm making sure that I pronounce it correctly. He is currently the chair for the Department of Industry and Technology. He was in the Army during Vietnam. Then we have Robert S. Pritchard. Mr. Pritchard is an assistant professor in the journalism department. He is a captain retired in the Navy. Now, a Navy captain is equivalent to an Army colonel, so it's an 06. And then we also have Mr. Bob Linson, who was also in the Army and the Air Force, so we're going to get two perspectives from him. Then we have Mr. Lou George, who's a service supervisor in the transportation department here at Ball State, who's retired after 32 years. He retired he held the rank of captain and also Chief Warrant Officer 2. Then we have Mr. Colonel retired Andrew F. Gothreau. He's the Assistant Human Resources Director for Training and Development here at Ball State. Then we have Dr. Bill Bock. Dr. Bill Bock is in the Physiology and Health Sciences Department here at Ball State. Then we have Dr. Ronald C. Warner. He's the chair for the Department of Modern Languages and Classics here at Ball State. And then we have Mr. Mann, Mr. John Mann, who is also a veteran from the Army. He was a captain, I believe, in Vietnam. Lieutenant in Vietnam. And he is now a business owner here in Muncie. And he owns Muncie Tool and Manufacturing Company. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to start with Dr. Whaley, because he's got to go to another engagement. And they'll go through the questions or the information that we kind of went through. And when they're finished, you feel free to ask them any questions that you want to. Mitch?
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here today. I see you folks out around campus either early in the mornings as I'm running in or wearing the uniform around campus, and I always, again, just appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you folks and maybe share any insights that I might have. I'm the chair of the School of Physical Education. Jack Westcott is Industry and Technology, so I have a background in exercise science and probably came to that background and an interest in that discipline in part due to my time in the military service, which I'll talk a little bit about here in a moment. But any of you that might have an interest in taking some courses in physical education, exercise science area, what have you, to help prepare yourself for your careers in the military and the physical side of that, certainly let us know. We would love to have you in our course order. I joined the Army. I enlisted in 1972, right out of high school, and that was a period in our country's history where I know many of the folks here at the panel would agree was not a real popular time in our country's history for the military services. I had a number of my colleagues at the time who felt like I had made a huge error in judgment by enlisting in the Army. At that time it was a 3-year enlistment. But in retrospect it became one of the real important decisions that I had made in my early life. It gave me a lot of opportunities to grow up before I had a chance to go back to college, and it focused my attention on the importance of higher education and career development. I enlisted on the delayed entry program while I was still in high school, and then went active duty in the military in the summer of '73 and served through the summer of '76. I, either fortunately or unfortunately, depending on one's perspective, did not have the opportunity to leave the U.S. I was stationed within the U.S. my entire time. My MOS was 05 Delta, which is a Morse code intercept operator. I was attached to the Army Security Agency, and my role was in Morse code intercepting. I worked the South Asian area for quite about 2 years of my time in the service. I was asked to give you a little impact on the or give you some information about the impact of military service on my life. And as I mentioned earlier, it really gave me an opportunity to grow up a little bit before I went back to the university for higher education. I realize that you folks are kind of entering into the military service through your higher education, and I think that's totally appropriate for you as future officers. I basically was one of those folks who would be working for you in the future. So keep that in mind. I was a Specialist 4 during my time in. It was a great opportunity to see the country and to meet a lot of interesting individuals, many of who I keep up with to this day. What kind of guidance would I have to share with you? It may seem as though some of the folks that you're working for right now seem a bit hard tasked at times, and they're always in your face maybe. But they're there to try and help you be the best soldier that you can be, and you're going to be the frontline individual in the future that will be leading the enlisted folks. So take your training seriously, but also enjoy the ride, because you're going to have a great time with it. I don't want to take up a lot more time, but if there are some questions about my time in service, I'd be happy to answer those. If we could move down and let the panel kind of get their stories out.
Mitch, at what point did you decide, or when did you have the goal set that you were going to use your military benefits and pursue a degree?
That's an interesting question. When I joined the military out of high school, it was because I really didn't have a lot of options. I couldn't afford to go to college at the time. The job market was not that great in 1972, 73. So it was an opportunity for me to go in, and I knew that there was always this GI Bill on the back end if I wanted to use it, but quite frankly couldn't see myself really going to college. Just never really had that mindset. But about 2 years into my military service, starting to think about what I would do on the back end, it clearly came into focus to me that higher education was something the government was going to help me with. So during my last year, I applied to undergraduate schools, and when I got out, kind of used that as an opportunity to get my undergraduate degree. And then during the undergraduate degree, interested in exercise science and physiology, and then ultimately used the GI Bill to get my master's degree as well. So it was a huge windfall for my financial health during the course of my college years.
No questions from the cadet?
Were you in the service full time before you retired from the job, or to get a civilian job?
I was in for a 3-year enlistment, and so I came out of that 3-year enlistment and went into my undergraduate program. I'm not sure if that was an answer to what you were asking me, or...
Yeah, how does that benefit the job that you're having or the job you have later on? How did that experience help you out toward the job you had in the past?
I think probably at this point as an administrator here at Ball State, the whole notion of teamwork and leadership and those kinds of things were things that I either learned or saw good or bad examples of during my time in the service that I could draw on during my role here at Ball State. I have a lot of memories of drill instructors and officers that, again, were either very good examples of accomplishing tasks and leading a group successfully, or unfortunately sometimes they weren't that great of an example. So I think that's probably one of the things I bring forward into my role here as a professor at Ball State and administrator, is the leadership aspect, teamwork, and the value of that. All of you hopefully would agree with me that collectively you can accomplish a lot more than you can individually. And sometimes it's hard to get folks to see the value of that. But military service definitely drove that home for me.
Great. Thank you.
And I want to thank you for the pen. Great pen. I didn't realize I was going to get this.
It works.
Mine doesn't work.
I planned it that way for you, sir. All right, sir, you will go ahead.
Sure, I'm Professor Pritchard. I teach in the public relations sequence, and I am here as a direct result of 27 years in the Navy. I started out in the Navy to fly jets. I did that. I left my undergraduate program. I graduated on the 25th of May, and on the 25th of June, I left I reported to Pensacola, Florida. How many of you all have seen the movie An Officer and a Gentleman? Okay. Based loosely, and I say loosely, on my experiences there, first 12 weeks of my naval career under the tutelage of a Marine drill instructor. It was quite exciting, actually. And indeed, Lou Gossett played an outstanding Marine drill instructor, and I heard everything he told those guys at one time or another. Went off to aviation training, got my wings about 2 years after I entered the service. And 2 years after that, I got grounded for sinuses. Now, this had been a 13-year dream, so I was stuck. I didn't really come into the Navy to drive ships, so that wasn't an option. I didn't really want to count parts in a bin, and the intelligence community really didn't think I was, so apparently I don't know what the deal was. So I got into public affairs, School of Hard Knocks. I went to the USS Enterprise as her public affairs officer, and got my designator changed. Designator's the same as an MOS for the Navy. Got the designator changed, became a public relations specialist. We call it public affairs. It's really public relations. The job description and the functions that I did for the next 23 years match up almost identically with those of a corporate public relations director. The last 10 years of my career were spent in the joint world. first as the deputy at U.S. Pacific Command, and then as the director of public affairs at U.S. Strategic Command in Omaha, Nebraska. And then I retired as the director of public affairs for U.S. European Command in Stuttgart, Germany. You sensing a theme here? From west to east. I said I am here directly because of my experience in the Navy. I was hired because I had 23 years of public relations experience, and my department wanted that experience on the faculty. So I am very, very pleased to be here. I got my master's here when I was just a pup down serving at the Defense Information School when it was still at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis. Went nights and weekends, summers, and finished up my degree. And I think in large measure my career was successful because of the education that I got here at Ball State. So that's the Reader's Digest version. What impact did the military have on me? Well, obviously it provided me with a very viable career that allowed me, when I first stepped into class, I had been out of uniform for about 16 days and taught my first class. But it was that experience that allowed me to make that transition. I was a huge procrastinator, and I know nobody in this room procrastinates. You never put off until the last minute what you can do and have lots of time. That taught me, and it took 27 years, and it still wasn't completely successful, but the military taught me that procrastination is the last thing that you can do. And it helped me get organized. It further instilled in me this sense of discipline that I had when I was growing up. My father was a 4-year Air Force veteran during the Korean War, and officer candidate school for me was a piece of cake because that's how I grew up. Everybody said, well, you know, why do you have to have your toothpaste caps all pointed the same direction in your doc kit? I said, what's your point? I mean, but it did further instill that sense of discipline. It did get me organized, I think. Well, mostly. It was wonderful. It was truth in advertising. For me, it wasn't just a job, it was an adventure. And for a kid who grew up in Speedway, Indiana, to go to the places that I got a chance to go to in that 27 years was pretty doggone incredible. So what guidance would I share with you? Well, there's a couple of things. Be aggressive. Don't slow down. Show initiative. Initiative will get you further than a lot of things will get you in the military. Think about commander's intent. And if you keep commander's intent in mind and you're aggressive and you seize the initiative, you will make the right choices and you will make yourself invaluable to your superiors, your seniors. As I used to tell the folks that work for me, don't bring your boss problems, bring them solutions. More than just solutions, bring them the first step to that solution. And again, you will make yourself invaluable. 3 other things. Be a leader. You're going to be in charge of people. Those people are going to depend on you. You're going to depend on them. So not just lead them, but trust them and empower them to do their job. Give them not just the responsibility, but give them the authority that they need to do their job. Make sure they have the resources that they need to do their job too. And the last thing that I would tell you is have fun. It is a great, great time. Even today, it is a great, great time. You will meet challenges that you never expected. You will go places and do things that you never, ever dreamed about. And please, please, please take advantage of the opportunities that you have to travel, because I don't think there is anything finer that the military can provide you than an opportunity to broaden the scope of your background, your understanding of culture, your understanding of humankind, and of the world in which we live. Over to you, sir, unless you've got questions for me. Yes, sir.
If you hadn't been grounded, do you think you'd still be here?
If I hadn't been grounded, would I still be here? Probably not. Truth be told, I was a C aviator. If I worked hard, I could be a B. As a public relations specialist, I was an A. It helped me find my niche. And I tell you something else, flying is a young man's game, young person's game. And you have to be 10 foot tall and bulletproof. I mean, you know, dying is what happens to the other guy. And I was really at a point in my career, quite candidly, where I was thinking in terms of when, not if. And so I probably was more valuable to our nation in the career field that I ended up getting into. But thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
You said it was like 16 or 18 days right after you got out, like you started immediately teaching. Did you think that being in the services helped you in that aspect, or did you have a difficult transaction between the two professions per se?
There were a few things that were difficult for me in the transition. One of them is you get paid once a month here instead of every 2 weeks, and it took me a little while to get my budget squared away. The second thing that was difficult for me in the transition was the meetings take forever around here. Excuse me, sir. In the military, in my experience, if a meeting went longer than an hour, it was time for another meeting. Okay, you cut it off, everybody went back and did their homework because obviously there hadn't been enough preparation or you could have gotten it done. Here, the meetings tend to last a little bit longer, not because people don't do their preparation, because sometimes I think they are overly prepared, but it takes that long sometimes to kind of get through all aspects of the problem. Actually, sometimes I think we talk just to talk. But that was a difficult transition. The rest of it, the teamwork, as the dean said, the discipline, the focus on goals and objectives, the focus on preparation were all things that helped me make the transition. It was really a lot easier than I really thought it was going to be, or was afraid it was going to be. I had some previous experience teaching from the platform when I was at the Defense Information School, and it was similar, but this is a little bit higher octane, if you will. Good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I remember you said you were a drill sergeant for a while. Is that correct?
I'm sorry?
Were you a drill sergeant for a while?
No. I spent my first 12 weeks being instructed in the fine art of the military by drill instructors. Okay. Yes, sir. No, sir. 3 bags full. I still remember the call. Reveille, reveille, reveille. All hands heave to and tricep. Morning PT will go down in 5 minutes. Made an impression.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Sir.
I'm Bob Linson, retired Vice President for fundraising and friend-raising here at Ball State. Been retired now about a dozen years. I can emphasize with you folks, I started out as a junior sitting there where you're seated back in 1943, and then we suddenly got our orders to be called up in World War II. And we were in the Army Reserve, which told us if you join the reserve, you can stay in college and get your degree. Well, they needed us a little bit sooner before we got our degree. So they called us up and sent us down to Fort Bend and interviewed us and asked us where we wanted to go, and then they sent us all to the infantry. So I had my eyes opened after a basic in the infantry and got into the Air Force, United States, the Army Air Force at that time. And I found it was a much, you had showers at night and you slept inside, and it was a hell of a lot better situation. Anyway, from there I went into armament and into remote control turrets for B-29s. And I went overseas and was in the Marianas in charge of squadron remote control turrets. and we were located on a little island called Tinian that some of you may remember that Enola Gay flew the atomic bomb mission from there and let us sweat for a number of weeks of what have happened if those damn bombs are on this island and it goes up, where are we going to go? Anyway, I had a very good career there and went back to civilian life and came back to Ball State and finished up. And the thing that the service gave me in those first 3 years, I wanted to be a public school administrator. And with my experience in supervision and classes I took, I was able to get a principal's license the first year out, and went out here my first year teaching as a principal and acting superintendent. And I had a good time for 2 or 3 years, and then I'm not sure it was a mistake or the thing to do. I'd stayed in the unorganized reserve. And come Korea, they decided that they needed to take B-29s out of mothballs and find people that know how to run the things on those planes and call us back into service. So I went back in 1950 and I went to Lowry Field, and we reestablished a flexible gunnery school. They had been discontinued. So anyway, it was a lot of fun being on the ground, bringing something back to life. And the other thing that happened then, I was stationed at Lowry Field in Denver, and I decided I ought to do something with my Saturdays and weekends, so I entered the doctoral program at the University of Denver and ended up getting my degree, my doctorate degree at Denver, primarily because I was in the Air Force stationed at Lowry Field. And I think probably what I would say to you as you go through your military career, take your opportunities in advancing yourself in college courses. They're out there available for you at very little cost, and it'll help a great deal. But mine has been kind of a mixed career, but it's one that I certainly look back on with a good deal of pride. Thank you.
Sir, where were you stationed in Korea?
I was in stateside in Korea. I was in Marianas in the Pacific, but fortunately I stayed away in Colorado, and it was a little more comfortable in Korea.
Any questions? All right, Mr. George.
Okay. My name is Lou George. I'm the service supervisor at Ball State Transportation Garage. My staff and I maintain over 750 pieces of Ball State fleet equipment, from the little white cars and trucks you see running around to the shuttle buses, the road buses, the weed whackers, the emergency generators, everything on campus that's got an automotive style engine. I enlisted in 1965 in the Indiana Army National Guard. I chose that route. I served in infantry units, airborne, mechanized infantry, cavalry, medical, and a signal unit as the last one. I've got 32 years, 9 months total service. In the last 13 years, I was a dual status. I worked for the Department of Defense, assigned to the Indiana Army National Guard, running maintenance shops. Around 1980, as a squadron motor officer in a cavalry unit, I resigned my commission, went back enlisted, and hired on with the DOD in the maintenance field to get into that area. Prior to that, I worked for automotive dealerships, and the National Guard was my retirement package. At that time in the early 60s, there was very little benefits out there in small businesses, and that was my retirement package, was to join the Guard. Spend 20 years, get a retirement. My time in the Guard, I responded to tornadoes, train wrecks, explosions, the riots in 1968 in Gary and Marion, and I was part of the observer team that went from Indiana to Detroit for the riots as a radio telephone operator. In 1973, I was commissioned through the OCS program, an infantry lieutenant. I stayed in the officer field through infantry, and I transferred to an armored cavalry unit, changed my MOS, got a branch transfer, and left in '85 when I resigned my commission to go to work for the DOD. In '89, I was appointed a warrant officer and spent the last 13 years as a warrant officer running maintenance shops. My specialty was to go into units with a failed maintenance mission and return that unit to full readiness. Normally, I found that to be a 3 to 5 year program. One of the things that I found, my military career allowed me to do some things that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. It gave me an excellent education in my career field. I'd always been a mechanical gearhead, and it provided me with an education and a way to feed my family that has been very well and been very good to us. Most all my service has been in the States. I've been Fort Jackson, Fort Bliss, Fort Carson, Colorado, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and I did one tour at Hohenfels in Germany at what they laughingly refer to over there as the Bocks. And I worked for Base Support Battalion, and I took care of all the equipment used by the controllers and the transit units that go into the training area. And it was stuff that was tore up from the get-go and was just patched together back the next time because of the turnaround time. Probably the greatest thing that I've gotten out of my military service is the maturity and the leadership. When I joined the National Guard, I had had one stint here at Ball State, unsuccessful. I went back in '67, '68 and was unsuccessful a second time for different reasons. But maturity, I learned leadership. You're going to spend your military career as officers, you're going to instruct people every day. You're going to teach people every day. And people skills was one of the finest things I learned in my military career, being able to deal with people on a day-to-day basis. My Army in 1965 and the Army I left in '98 were night and day different from each other. And the Army that you're going to see now in 2003, 2004 is different a lot from what it was in '98. I think it was 1975 when I saw the first female in uniform. 10 years into my career, I didn't know women were in the service, other than maybe, I'd heard of an Army nurse somewhere. Now we have women throughout the service doing an excellent job. The Army has always been an opportunity field for minorities. I think probably the best thing I can tell you from my realm of experience is you're going to have plenty of instructors who's going to teach you the warfare side of it. One place that I found units always make a mistake is in the readiness side. If your equipment's not ready, you can't train, you can't go out and play war, you can't take the hit. You need to know your maintenance people and your maintenance warrant, because if you get your readiness up speed above the 95th percentile, then all the little problem areas that you have with equipment that will prevent you from training, you won't have. I basically was the old guy they called at night when it quit running on the hill in the rain. Come and wave your magic hands over at Chief and make it work so we can go on and do the mission. And that's what I did. Yes, sir.
I have one question for you. You're in Gothreau. How many days and endless nights you spend in that mud?
Let's see, right outside gate number 6, Keller Myers down the hill. And that was about the only thing that kept you out of the mud, was when you could sneak out gate 6 and go to Keller Myers.
Any questions? Next, Chief.
You're welcome.
Sir?
My name is Andy Gothreau. I'm the training director here at the university, responsible primarily for staff training. And if any of you are familiar with the All BSU messages, I'm the guy that sends out all the messages relating to training sessions that are going on here. I've been here just a little bit over 2 years. I've actually been retired from the Army for 12 years. I retired as a colonel Field Artillery Colonel in 1990. I'd like to say my career actually started many years before, and would even highlight the fact that maybe I'm a little bit unusual here, that as a junior in high school, I joined the National Guard. I was a National Guard member for a year. My motivation wasn't particularly patriotic, but it was a good opportunity to drink beer when you're underage. Subsequently, I spent a year at the University of Notre Dame as a freshman. And the Army team, I remember this was 1958, came up, played football against Notre Dame, and beat Notre Dame. And I thought, gee, I'm in the wrong school if I want to see a good football team. I spent the next 4 years at the military academy, and they lost 4 consecutive years to Notre Dame, as well as the Navy, I might add. So it wasn't until long after I graduated from the military academy that I ever saw actually Army beat Navy. And this year they obviously didn't. But graduated in 1963 from the military academy, did the normal things, airborne ranger, and then started my career as a field artillery officer. Was assigned to Germany for my first assignment for all kinds of reasons, but a great place to go to train as a young field artillery officer. Also a great place to go and have fun. And again, beer seems to keep entering in the situation, but if you like beer, by all means, plan on going to Germany. Early on in my career, I decided that in addition to doing the field artillery thing, I'd like to do something else, and I became what was known as a foreign area officer. And this is a very formal program the Army still has. The particular area that I selected was Russia, or Soviet Union. It was a 4-year dedicated program which involved a couple years, or a year language school, grad school, and a couple years at a little place called the U.S. Army Russian Institute in Garmisch, Germany. Again, back to Germany, and probably the most beautiful location in the world. So you all have the opportunity to visit Germany. By all means, go skiing in Garmisch. A wonderful place to be located. Subsequent to that, my career was supposed to be rotating assignments between field artillery, for instance, Vietnam, and then military intelligence related assignments, Pentagon, Defense Attaché, Defense Intelligence Agency, things like this. And that was a great way, I thought, to progress through a career, because I spent a lot of time both with the troops, if you would, but also doing some fun things in the political military arena. As a foreign area officer, I went in and out of Russia or the Soviet Union probably about 20 times over the course of a number of years. When I was assigned to Defense Intelligence Agency, had the opportunity to eavesdrop on some very select classified information on what was going on in the Kremlin. And this is very exciting times for a young officer, especially if you're assigned in Washington, where you can't afford to live there, so you have to have something going for you. Some of the fun assignments I've had, and these are ones that I sort of reflect back. I don't see Vietnam as very much fun, but I did spend a year there, and there were some funny things that happened, and I'd be happy to share some of those with you later on. But as a foreign area officer, I spent a lot of time in schools, and I would suggest to you that you can expect to spend at least 25% of your military career, if you stay in some sort of formal education while you're in the military. So if you think it's all over by the time you graduate, it ain't. It's just starting. And probably even more so for you guys, because right now, I tell you, you will not be competitive if you don't go out and get a graduate degree as soon as possible. That is a requirement to succeed in the Army today. Probably even 2 graduate degrees, at least a master's. One of the last things I did in the Army before I retired, I was involved with the Inf Inspections as a team leader back in 1988, 89. And this is somewhat akin to what we're doing, I think, in Iraq today. When President Reagan signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, they formed 20 inspection teams, and we went unannounced inspections throughout Russia looking for violations of the agreement we had. In other words, that the Soviets actually had intermediate nuclear weapons other than what they claimed they had in the agreement. A very fun assignment, very exciting assignment, as a number of other assignments I had were. The last thing I did in the U.S. Army, I was assigned to something called in Fort Leavenworth. I was the director of what was known as the Threats Directorate in something called the Combined Arms Command. As such, we were responsible for war games, military instruction, and a few other things, force development. In the summer, in July of 1990, we played a high-level war game in Virginia, Tradoc headquarters, and I had the opportunity to play the role of an individual named Saddam Hussein. I will say,
look like him.
In that war game, I will say I did a hell of a lot better than he actually did a few months later on in Gulf War #1. But anyway, as I say, I retired in 1990. I've done a number of things since then, involving with foreign area as well as business, and I ended up here a couple of years ago. One of the things is the impact the military service had on me. First of all, I was very proud of the 27 years I spent on active duty anyway. I feel that the road I've gone, and why I spent some time explaining it, because I do have a very intent interest in foreign affairs, national security, things like this. I've become more conservative. I think that comes doing with the age more than anything else, but also very broad-minded. When we started talking about national security and the application of force, a very, very difficult, complicated subject. And I can't remember who said it, but certainly the use of force is one that's too important to be left to our political leaders. And it involves our military leaders to get involved from an advise and consent standpoint as well. Not that they have the formal role, but I think my experience has been that invariably the military officers are probably the last people that want to use force, unlike some of our politicians. But anyway, guidance I'd like to share with you, as I mentioned, the education thing. Plan on it. You're going to see a lot more of it. By all means, go ahead and get those degrees and do what you have to. By all means, do the best you can while you're in the Army. Do your best job possible. Have fun, as other people have mentioned, but also remain competitive. And I say remain competitive, you're going to have to take care of your own career. Especially the Army, I know where this force has been reduced certainly to 50% what it was in Vietnam, but it's also as a result of a much more competitive Army career-wise than it used to be perhaps. And as a result, you better be very much aware of what it takes to stay and be promoted and hopefully even get ahead of your contemporaries. So just be aware of that and work that into your careers. And I guess that concludes my remarks. Question?
Sir, 2 questions.
Yes.
Why did you leave the intelligence community, and why did you come to Muncie, Indiana?
Well, I thought I'd go in the business world. Thank you. And the first thing I did when I got out of the Army, I actually went to work for Mayflower Transportation down in Carmel. And the idea was they were going to do a lot of business in Russia. And I remember giving a presentation in 1990, and it ended something like this. It was that it's going to take at least 5 years before Russia's in a position to do business and be able to afford to do business with the rest of the world. I could give that very same presentation today and say it'll be another 10 years before Russia is in that position. So there really wasn't a whole lot of international business involving at least Russia, which was my expertise. I did some independent consulting and a couple other things. And here as a training officer, I think was a logical move. Again, you're all going to be trainers, as was mentioned before. You will have the opportunity to instruct, be a teacher. And in some of my jobs, I had that include the one at Fort Leavenworth, where we were teaching the threat, if you would, to the U.S. Army. And so this is how I ended up here.
Okay, Major Baker said that we had 1,600 veterans dying every so many days. Well, as we speak, I'm supposed to be standing in front of my class, which is deaf and dying. And so I'm sure they'll give me 5 minutes, but I'm going to have to make this real quick because I have a class over there in science hall. I'm Bill Bock. I'm the, I guess one of the, I haven't heard anybody else on the panel say this, but I'm teaching at the University of Massachusetts up there in Amherst. And I got a special delivery letter from my draft board in New York. And so I went into the military as a draftee, not looking forward to the military at all at that time. Went down, like some of you, went down to my basic and advanced training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And there was a drill sergeant down there who made the first impact on me. There's a kind of an expression I have. The first impression is the most lasting, and the memory of the time and the place can haunt you for a lifetime. And this drill sergeant stood up to me about 2 inches from my face at the beginning of my training. He said, "Young man, listen to me and don't ever forget this. Good, better, best. Never let it rest till the good is better and the better is best. And that's what the Army is all about." So I thought about that, and I've never forgotten it. I use it in my classes. I see a couple of you out there who've been in my classes. So I actually, from that point on, as an E1, became very interested in not only being good, better, but best. I was an athlete. I was a scholar. I was the scholar athlete in my class. I thought it was that's what it was all about. But I probably didn't have the discipline that I really got from the Army. I think the Army really straightened me out. So I had an invitation to go to OCS. And I went down to the infantry school down at Fort Benning and got my commission in the infantry. And I kept hearing this resounding word in the back of my mind: good, better, best. Never let it rest till the good is better and the better is best. So that's what I did. I wanted to become better. I knew I was good, but I wanted to become better. And so I went to some of these schools that have already been referred to. I went, most exciting of which, of course, was jump school. And I, because of that experience, had a chance to be assigned with the 101st Airborne Division. And I spent my 5 years with the 101st Airborne Division under William Westmoreland, which I think some of you must know about. However, I was wanting to be the best. I knew I was good. I knew I was getting better, but I wanted to be the best. So I said, well, the best for me is to go on and get my doctorate. And I then applied through the military channels to go to graduate school. And I was advised at the time that, well, when you become a field grade officer, that's when we'll send you. So basically, I had a tough decision to make in my life at that point in time to stay in for 5 or 6 more years until I became a major or maybe even a lieutenant colonel. And most of the guys that went through OCS with me, we have reunions every 5 years. I actually retired about the time you retired as field grade officers. So that's probably where what I would have been if I was in the military, if I'd stayed in the military. But I did resign and went out and completed a PhD in exercise physiology. And so the military, although it was only a 5 or 6 year period in my life, probably one of the most impressive periods in my life. I decided as a result of that experience that I was going to keep a diary. And so every day for the last 35 years, I have a diary and I keep an entry. And if I could advise you maybe on anything that you might do in your life that would make an indelible impression on not just you but your family, and that is keep a diary. Think about it. It was drudgery for the first maybe 3 or 4 months, but after that, it's like some of you have said, it's like we do everything in the military by the numbers. And so that's what I do every day, and I've been able to keep a careful and an accurate record of everything that I've done. I had an invitation last fall from Major Lee Baker to join a group of educators to go down to visit 3 military bases, Fort Benning, Fort Rucker, and down at the Army-Navy Dive School in Panama City. And boy, did that bring back memories. But I had a diary. So I went back and I started reading about some of the things that I had done 20 and 30 years before. And boy, how that just crystallized everything and made me even more of an advocate for what you're doing here today. I couldn't say anything more and better than to say what the Army can do for you is what it did for me. It'll make you the best you can be. And isn't that the motto? To be the best that you can be. So remember that, good, better, best, never let it rest till the good is better and the better is best. The last thing I'll say is this. There are a lot of things that we learned in the Army, the values, loyalty, respect, duty, honor, service. But I think respect is something that stood out in my mind that really came across from the men and the women that I served with in the military. And it starts out like this. It's like the uniform you're wearing. There's probably nothing more that depicts the respect of the military than the uniform that you're wearing. And the military displays more diversity than probably any other area of our lives together. And so that respect that you have from the uniform, from the ceremony, from the people that you meet, from the opportunities that you have, and probably as much as anything else, for the things that you do with yourself. That's what we call self-respect. And that means physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, developing yourself to be the best that you can be. And I'm sure if you can, you'll find your experience, whether it's 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 20 years, or even longer, you'll really be happy about your experience with the military. And now I'm half dead because I'm 5 minutes late to my class, so I really excuse me, I need to go back. I'll see you later. And by the way, I did want to make one little special presentation. I thought we'd have a little more time. What you've heard here today in part has been part of what you could call your military heritage. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this publication, which is Military Heritage. And just as a small token of my appreciation for this invitation, and especially for Major Lee Baker, I have entered into a 2-year subscription to you, Major Baker, for this Military Heritage, which I hope you, men and women, will have a chance to read as they spend time with you. I'll also give this to you and thank you. Started, I believe, up here at 2. They allow professors 10 minutes. I'll see you later.
I got one.
All right. My name is Ron Warner. I'm a chairman of Modern Languages and Classics here at Ball State. It seems that military involvement is always a generational thing, and I'm actually from the generation of the Second World War. I've been at Ball State now for 37 years as a professor. I was born in 1935, which was 2 years after Hitler came to power in Nazi Germany, and 6 years before Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. One thing I've always been proud of is when I was a little boy, I would look at my grandmother's picture window, and she had a flag there with red, white, and blue, and in the middle were 5 red stars. And that was 1 star from my father, who was stationed in Germany in the Army, and 4 of my uncles, one of which was with the Seabees, 1 was with the Navy, 3 Army, 1 Seabee, and 1 Navy. But she actually had 5 sons who fought in the Second World War. My brother was also in the Army, and stationed in Germany, fought in Germany. He came back from the service in 1945. He'd been wounded in a battle at Recklinghausen, Germany. And I remember when he came home that day. We were all sitting in the kitchen, and I thought, someone's looking at me. I looked out the window, and there was my brother looking in the window. Well, the military has been sort of because of the fact I was born in 1935, almost was automatic for me to think about becoming a soldier and doing my duty for my country. So I graduated from Warsaw High School, Warsaw, Indiana in 1954, and I immediately enlisted in the Army. And I was sent to Fort Leonard, Missouri for basic training. After basic training, I enlisted in the 11th Airborne Division. But prior to that, I had to go to basic, of course. They sent me then to Fort Campbell, Kentucky to go through airborne school. We started out with about 138 young men in our class at Fort Campbell. And airborne, as you know, was pretty hard training. I think there was something, about 30-some people came through airborne school. It was a pretty tough regiment. We were sent then, I was sent to Germany in 1954, and I immediately was asked if I had an interest in going to OCS. I said, no, not particularly. Well, are you interested in learning the German language and becoming an interpreter? And I said, I would be interested in that. So I was sent to Garmisch-Partenkirchen, to the Army Language School for German. And it was a 6-month crash course to become a rudimentary interpreter. And following that, I was sent back into Augsburg, Germany, where I was stationed for the rest of my tour of duty. My MOS was a machine gunner. I was in Company B, 188th Airborne Infantry Regiment. And I often went to Grafenwehr and to Hohenfels, words you've heard earlier. These were pretty rough training grounds. No one really wanted to go there because it was a pretty miserable situation crawling up and down those hills with a caliber 30 machine gun on your back in the mud. But it was a good learning experience for me because I was only 18 years old when I went into service. I actually went in with the idea that I'm going to become a career man because I had one of my uncles who was in the Second World War. He was a sergeant major of the United States Army Band. Eventually, he fought in Germany, in Korea, in Vietnam, and finally ended up, his last assignment was in Washington as a sergeant major of the U.S. Army Band. And that's where he retired from that position after 30 years in the service. So I had a lot of interest in serving my country, and I became a member of the 11th Airborne Division. And during that time, while stationed in Augsburg, Germany, I also had the opportunity to enroll in some college classes through the United States Armed Forces Institute. I took quite a few English courses by correspondence, which I would always recommend. All of my friends today have talked about the benefits of education in the service, and there is a great opportunity to become educated. You can always benefit yourself more, and education is of so much importance today in our present technological army. A lot of skills that are needed that weren't really needed back then because of all of the new development. But I would definitely encourage that. So I took these correspondence courses, but I also had the opportunity to go out for the 11th Airborne Division football team, which I did. And I played on the Southern Air Command 11th Airborne Division football team for 2 seasons. And when I left the Army in 1958, I came directly to Ball State University and went out for the Ball State University football team. I walked on, and I played a couple seasons here. And I finished my undergraduate training at Ball State. I majored in German, which was a direct result of having had the opportunity to study German, learn German in Germany at the school in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. And I actually decided that, hey, I want to teach German down the road. So upon graduating from Ball State in 1962, I went to the University of Connecticut with a United States Armed Forces Institute scholarship. Well, it was actually a fellowship. It was a USAFI fellowship, which I was eligible for because of my military service. And I spent about 3 years in Connecticut, and following that I returned to Ball State and became a German professor, and I've been here ever since. So I've gained a lot of advantages from the service. The impact that the military had on me was, as a young 18-year-old boy, when I went in the Army, I didn't really have a lot of responsibility. I didn't think, and the military certainly taught me responsibility and leadership, and those 2 things have helped me through my career as a professor at Ball State University. I've had a wonderful time here. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about those military experiences I had. I was only in the service for 4 years, but those experiences I had and the friends I made and the things I learned in the military have benefited me through my life. Even today, I'm a member of the 11th Airborne Association. 11th Airborne was, of course, dismantled back in the late 50s, but we still have a national association, and I still maintain contacts with a lot of my friends. Some of the best friendships you'll ever make are the buddies that you make in the Army or in any of the branches of the military service. But those are people that you'll never forget, and I think all the people that have spoken today will tell you the same thing. Some of the most lasting friendships you'll ever have are the people you serve with in the military service. It means a lot as you go through life. So that's a little bit of the impact that the service has had on me. In terms of advice I could give to you, any kind of guidance I could give you, I would say that you need to really believe firmly in what you're doing and do what you're doing to the very best of your ability. You have a very honorable tour of life in front of you, and you're going to be a credit to your country. And there may be some dissenters who don't always believe that you're doing the right thing, but you need to believe in yourself. You're doing a wonderful thing by serving your country. There have been so many people who have done that in the past, and always believe in yourself and believe in your task, and you'll come through all of it. And now, if there are any questions that you might have for me, I'll be ready to answer them.
What position did you play?
I was a guard. I was a lineman.
Cool.
I weigh as much now as I did then. 236 pounds. And that's also something that I benefit from. I think being in the branch of service I was in, it was necessary to stay in pretty good physical condition, and that taught me that it's something that I really need to do throughout my life, and it's helped me health-wise. I've always managed to stay in pretty good physical condition.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Mann?
Yes, I'm John Mann, and I'm not connected with the university other than the fact that I am a Ball State graduate. I'm a business owner here in Muncie. I own a small factory called Muncie Tool and Manufacturing. I didn't have this outline, so I'm just going to kind of go through this. But I think being the last speaker probably is an advantage, because I'll tell you what, you folks have heard some good stuff here today. If you really take it to heart and concentrate on what's I was going to join the Army. And not only did I want to join the Army, I want to be in the infantry. And not only did I want to be in the infantry, I want to be a leader. So I went to basic training at Fort... I went to infantry OCS at Fort Benning. So that was the most important training, I suppose. I went through 6 months of good training. I got my commission as an infantry second lieutenant, and I was off and running. I got a first assignment here in the States, 4.5 months. It was really nice. You kind of got into a comfort zone where I really enjoyed what I was doing, and all of a sudden the orders came, jungle school down in Panama. So I went to jungle school down in Panama and met all my old OCS classmates. The Army had this arranged just perfect. So we had kind of a reunion. We got to see each other again, and we went through the jungle training. And then the next step, of course, was Vietnam. And I got to Vietnam, and I want to share a few things with you, although I'm not going to get into, a lot of the stuff that really doesn't accomplish anything. But I want to tell you about some of the highlights. There were some fun things, and there were some very serious things. And I want to try to cover some of these things for you. And I want you to listen to me. One thing was, as I was landing in Long Beach, and I was an infantry lieutenant, I knew what my calling was at that point. I was going to be a rifle platoon leader. I was going to be leading people out in the jungle, and we were going to be in a dangerous situation. And I was sitting in the seat on the airplane next to an Air Force enlisted guy. And I started really, as we were landing in Long Beach, I could feel the heat hitting the airplane. The realization that I was here finally hit me. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I got myself into? And about that time, the Air Force guy sitting on my right said, wow, he says, it's pretty hot here. He said, I hope our barracks have air conditioning. And at that point, I almost thought about hitting him. I thought, no, that's what he chose to do. He chose to do what he's going to do. I chose to do what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be comfortable, and I'm not going to be an air conditioner. So anyway, I was assigned to the 1st Infantry Division on my request. I wanted to follow kind of in the footsteps of my buddy that I lost from high school. And I was in the 1st Division in a mechanized battalion. We covered a lot of area. We got to do a lot of things. Got into some very dangerous situations. I remember my first firefight was during Christmas ceasefire in '69. And this is kind of funny because this is the first time I'm sharing some of this stuff, so it's really kind of a strange feeling, but hopefully it's going to be good. Anyway, I remember having to get permission to fire on the enemy. And that was not like the movies were that I could remember from the TV days, World War II movies. But anyway, it was a different world over there. The 1st Infantry Division went back to Fort Riley, Kansas in, I think, March of 1970. And at that point, I didn't have enough time in country to go with them, so I was reassigned to the 1st Air Cav Division. And the 1st Air Cav Division, in my opinion, was not as good as the Big Red One. It was, in my opinion, kind of a ragtag outfit, but we flew all over the place. I mean, it was one adventure after another. I remember one night I was with some of my fellow officers in Tane Inn, and we'd gone into the officers' club there and drank a couple of beers, and I'd heard that term mentioned earlier. And somebody came in and said there was going to be a meeting at the headquarters within so many minutes, and we were all supposed to be there. So we reluctantly set our beers down and went to the talk, I believe, is where the meeting was at. And we had a general that went to a map, and he started pointing. He said, tomorrow we're going to go here, here, and here. And we were all a little blurry-eyed at that point. We thought, man, he's confused because he's pointing at Cambodia. But the next day we were on our way to Cambodia. And got to see a lot of country. Flying in helicopters is really a lot of fun. I know one of the things I took great pleasure in was I had a friend that flew Cobras, and occasionally we would let his co-pilot go to the club, and I would take the co-pilot's place, and we'd go up flying around at night, trying to see if we could get in trouble. It was always fun. I always pretended like I was in a jet. I wasn't fortunate enough to fly in jets, but it was a lot of fun. There are very serious situations that come up, and it really made me realize how important training is. You know, you may not be in infantry, you may be in another combat arms, or you may be in a non-combat arms, but you can find yourself in combat. And you can find yourself in a situation where you're responsible for people. And in my mind, I don't think there's any greater responsibility than a platoon leader has for the welfare of his people. And I think that's more important than somebody out here that runs a GM plant of 2,000 people. There's no comparison. It's a very serious business. You need to prepare yourself for that responsibility. You need to learn everything you can while you're here in your ROTC classes. But you also want to do some extra things. As you're doing today, and I think this was an excellent idea, let veterans talk about their military experiences and soak it up like a sponge. You know, you'll learn a little bit of this and a little bit of that from different people, but it will help you. It will help prepare you. Learn all you can by reading. You've got books, I'm sure, in your curriculum here in ROTC that you read. You have training manuals and so forth. But there's some excellent books out there. One that was mentioned earlier was Brigadier General Jim Shelton just published a book called The Beast Was Out There. And I happened to go to his book signing because I was in the Big Red One the same time he was, and we knew some of the same people. And we got to share for about an hour and a half. But that book talks about a battle in which there were some strategic errors made in the planning of the battle, and the way it was run. A lot of different things about that should not have happened. But these are things that you can read about and basically educate yourself on. You know, these are some things that can happen. You know, we train, we prepare ourselves, we go into war somewhere, and I don't care how well we are prepared and trained, we are going to learn things when we get there that we didn't know. It just happens. I know I learned things from the first time I was in a firefight. It was a whole different situation. I never in a million years would have had any thoughts about what that was really like. You can't really explain it to somebody. But what you want to do as a leader, as a lieutenant in the Army, you want to prepare yourself, do the things I've talked to you about. One very important thing is take care of your body. If you're going to be going somewhere, you need to be in great physical condition. At the time I was in the Army, I smoked. I quit a number of years ago. But I know after OCS, I was 185 pounds of solid muscle. I could run 10 miles without breathing hard, even though I smoked cigarettes. I had a 32-inch waist. You want to take care of yourself. I got to Vietnam. I did like so many others did. I quit eating. We had C rations. And so my meal was maybe at night, if I had a little bit of time, to heat up some hot chocolate with some C4 explosive and maybe eat a C ration can of peaches or something. That was my food for the day. Consequently, my weight went down to about 155 pounds. And sleep deprivation is extremely harmful to you. I mean, I don't think there's any way you can get used to that. It's just something you have to deal with. And the best way you can deal with that is to be mentally, physically, and spiritually prepared for that. Physical training, I would think that if you're going to pursue being in a position to be a leader, you need to take some other courses. You need to go to Ranger School, airborne training if at all possible. If you're going to, well, I guess that's all I need to say about that. You don't want to worry about what you're going to do if you get into combat. You want to be prepared and know what you're going to do. I'll tell you one thing that's very important, and I think this is a lesson a lot of people learned or maybe should have learned in Vietnam, was you can take all the training, you can learn all the right things to do, but if you don't apply it properly, you can get yourself in big trouble. One thing you need to do is, just because you've got that gold bar on your shoulder, doesn't make you better than that sergeant or that Spec 4. It just means that you're their leader. They are looking up to you to have the right answers, to make the right decisions, and during combat, making the right decisions is very critical. And respect is a word that everybody uses. They don't respect you because of your rank. They will respect you because they know that you know what you're doing, that you are, you respect them for what they can do. You utilize their strengths. You help strengthen their weaknesses. You learn your people inside and out. And they will then follow you. If you don't do this right, if you mess up, if you make mistakes because you haven't been paying attention, something could bad happen to you in that you might wind up going back home either wounded or in a bag. And it happened a lot. And it's because people went out into a leadership position. They were in charge of a platoon. They didn't know what they were doing. They made stupid mistakes. And somebody in that platoon took it upon themselves that they didn't want to endanger all the rest of the platoon, and they would take care of the situation. This is real. Very serious. The impact of the military service on me, when I came back out of the military, I got out. Looking back now, and I'll get into this a little bit later if I have time, but I wish I would have stayed in. And I'll explain that a little bit. But when I got out, my desire was to finish my undergraduate degree in business and get a job in the corporate life. That was my goal. I came back to Ball State. I went from being a mediocre school boy that liked to party and didn't care about grades to making A's and B's very easily. And in many cases, I didn't have to study much. It was because of the discipline and the things that I learned in the military. I was able to do that. I thought the military service, and I'm going to be honest with you, and this isn't what everybody wants to hear, but I thought the experience of being an officer in the Army was going to help me get a corporate job. I wanted to be in the corporate world. I wanted to rise through the management ranks. And when I put on my resume that I was a Vietnam veteran, that I'd been an infantry lieutenant and served in the 1st Infantry Division, 1st Air Cav Division, it was a bad time. The Vietnam War was a very bad war and very much frowned upon by everybody except the military. And even the military wasn't sure about why they were doing this, but it was based on political decisions made that they couldn't control. And when you're in the military, that's what you do. You obey the political decisions that are made and you carry them out. You do the best you can do. I thought that was going to help me in my career. It didn't help me. I think part of that goes back to the Lieutenant Calley situation maybe that put a black eye on all of us. from that time period. And then a lot of people thought, well, he was a Vietnam combat veteran, he must be half nuts, he was probably on drugs or whatever. And it doesn't really help you that much. What will help you is what you learn and what you exercise. If you learn good leadership abilities and learn how to manage people and learn how to communicate with people and learn how to work with people, you can go very far. There were some very good things said earlier in this panel about pleasing your boss, presenting the first step to the solution. Don't be a problem to your boss. Be a solution. Be somebody that your boss really likes. I don't care if that's in the military or if that's in a civilian corporation somewhere. That's very important. I had to kind of make my way through the civilian life on my own. The military experience, as far as the resume, didn't really help. But I was able to advance and become a production control manager at Inf Corporation. I've been materials manager at several other manufacturing companies. And about 16 years ago, I did a leverage buyout with a couple of gentlemen. We bought a manufacturing company. And then after 9 years, I decided I didn't like partners because we all don't agree on each other or on all the decisions made. So I decided to start out on my own and start my own company. So that's what I did 6.5 years ago. So that's what I'm doing now. If I had the choice today, knowing what I know, now this is just me, but instead of getting out of the Army, I would have pursued an Army career. I actually fell in love with the Army, and I didn't realize it at the time. But I would have pursued a military career, and looking at the advantages versus civilian life, I would have to say that, and some of these things have been touched on earlier, that there are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of opportunities for schooling. There are a lot of different assignments that you're going to be able to take in very, very many locations all over the world. You're not going to sit at a desk in a corporation for 5 or 10 years doing the same thing day after day. It's very interesting work, and that is an advantage. I suppose, well, I'll go ahead and cut it off now, but I think what I want to say is if anybody has any questions, even on a one-to-one basis, that's really serious about their leadership roles and so forth, and foresee the fact that they might go to combat someday, I would be happy to talk to you one-on-one or relate some other experiences. And I think that's going to do it, so if there's any questions.
Mr. Mann?
Yes, sir?
I know it's difficult to put into words, but I'm going to ask you to try. Describe a firefight. What you see, your senses, what your body does.
Those are all very important. I mean, you have to exercise your senses. That comes by experience, and it's time and place. If you're fortunate enough to live through it, you will learn a lot. But you have to rely on your training. You have to rely on what you've learned in classes, and you put it to the test. And you have to use a lot of common sense and leadership ability. And if you're lucky, you're going to make it. If it's a wrong situation, I don't care how good you are, how smart you are. That has nothing to do with whether you're going to live or not if your time has come. But you want to do the very best you can, and you want to acclimate yourself to that environment just as well as you can. Eat too. Don't do like I did. Don't just eat one can of sea rations a day. I think the Army found out that was one of the things that compounded the problem of sleep deprivation, was the troops weren't eating well enough, and it's hard to function well when you're tired and hungry.
What did you actually see with your eyes the first firefight that you were in? How did you know you were in a firefight?
It's kind of funny. I was very fortunate. I had a platoon sergeant in my platoon who was a D6. He was a black man that had served 2 tours in Vietnam. He was very knowledgeable. He'd been through this stuff a lot. And I listened to him. And it was very important that I did, especially my first few months, because I learned a lot from him. But the first firefight was, I happened to be looking through a starlight scope, and I think you probably all know what they are. It's just a magnification device that magnifies the light. And I'm looking at a starlight scope, and I see a couple people looking back at me. And it wasn't our guys. And being the Green Second Lieutenant that I was, I said, "Sarge, take a look at this." He looks out there and he says, Yes, sir, a couple people. Oh, man, what do we do now? So I was on the Prick 25 calling up the company commander and reported the situation when then the fight ensued. That's the first time I saw anybody. Many times when you're in that particular war with the jungle and so forth, it was they would hit you when they wanted to. They'd set up ambushes. They were many times in small groups, and by the time you collected yourself, it was over with. And if you thought you did some damage to the enemy, you could search areas, and you might find some evidence, but you many times wouldn't find the things you were looking for.
Any other questions? All right, we do have one more veteran who came in, and sir, if you'll go ahead and take a seat up at the table. This is Mr. Roger Richard.
Sorry I wasn't here earlier, but I had a 12:30 class to teach.
Sir, if you'll give them your name, what you do here now, call state, and then your military
Okay,
experience.
my name is Roger Richard. I'm in the Philosophy and Religious Studies department and teach world religions and religions in American culture. I served in the 60s in the Army. I served 3 years. 2 of them were in Germany. And one incident that your leader, I think, was interested in my talking about was something that happened in 1967. 66 and 67 I spent in Germany. And of course, Vietnam was already going on at that point. But we came, with Vietnam already going on, we came this close to a Third World War at that point. And I think that emphasizes the fact that we need to be ready, because you never know when something is going to happen. But how many of you know your history? You're thinking in the Middle East. Anybody remember what was happening in 67 in the Middle East?
6-Day War?
6-Day War, you got it. I served in the Signal Corps. Our mission was to supply radio and telephone communications to field artillery. 16th Signal in a little town called Bock in Germany, between Frankfurt and Gießen, if you know Germany at all. And during the 6-Day War, about 2-3 days after it had begun, we had a directive that came down that said all leaves, all passes are canceled. Be ready to move out in 48 hours. This is not an exercise. Now think about the situation right then, and why we need to be prepared constantly, because you never know what's going to happen. But Israel were our clients. They still are. They buy most of their equipment from us, and we support them. At that time, the Soviet Union was still in full force. Egypt was a client of the Soviet Union. Now, if in fact if they hadn't ended it in the 6 days when we did, I would have been right in the middle of it, along with my buddies. And if the Soviet Union got involved on the Egyptian side, and with Vietnam already happening, we could very easily have had another Third World War at that point. So I'm just thankful that the Israelis stopped it when they did, because the whole thing could have gotten totally out of hand at that point. But that's probably about the most exciting thing for me. I never saw combat. I was in Germany for the 2 years. But in getting out, I found that there were many advantages to having served. And I never noticed that prejudice that you were talking about. Fortunately, that never occurred to me, having been in that same era, although I personally wasn't involved over there. But I was able to use it to go on and finish my bachelor's, which was interrupted because of my service, and then go on and get my master's, all using the GI Bill. And what I've heard a couple of you mention, and I found this to be true too, before my time in the service, I was very undisciplined, partying, goofing off, my grades weren't that good. After I came back, I was a very serious student and went straight through. And then when we moved here, which was 13 years ago from California. Out there, we couldn't afford to buy a house because the costs were too high. When we got here, I was able to use GI Bill to buy a house, and that has been proved to be very very handy. One small incident that I think you might enjoy. We were out in the field one time when I was in Germany, and heard a message. We had a couple of guys that ran hard copy between sites with a 3/4 ton truck, and this one guy was going down a hill and his brakes failed, and so there was a pear grove off to the side. And he steered into the pear grove, so he figured he could hit a tree, and that would stop his truck, which it did. Unfortunately, the very tree that he aimed at, the farmer who owned the field was up in it picking trees. He came down on the hood, and they took him to the hospital, and they brought a translator in. And the driver was saying afterwards, he says, the guy kept saying over again and again, he says, all the trees in the grove, why this one? Why did you take this? But I don't want to take up too much time because I know we've had several people already and you're probably getting tired of listening. But if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them on that.
Thank you, sir, for coming.
Sure.
We
My
still
pleasure.
have a few minutes left in class, so what I would like to do now is, I'm sure some of the cadets, they might have some questions that popped in their mind, but if not, I know that you all up here sitting on the panel, as your buddies have been telling some of their tales and recounting some of the things they've gone through, perhaps a tale or an instant has resurfaced in your memory bank that you would like to share with everybody. So, sir, I'll start with you, and if you do have something, feel free to share and go on down the line, please.
Okay. Had some great times. I had some not so great times. The great times included having the chance to meet Bob Hope and George Burns. My admiral was, I had the great fortune and honor of being the first public affairs specialist for the SEALs in San Diego. And my boss was a speaker for a special event at the Los Angeles Country Club. And I went up to make the arrangements ahead of his presentation. And the guy I was working with and I were having lunch there, and he said, would you like to meet George Burns? And I said, would I? Absolutely. He's my hero. He said, well, he's playing bridge right next door, so the Admiral's buddy was with me, and so we went next door, and he got George out of his card game. He came out to the hall where we chatted a little bit. He gave me one of his cheap cigars and told me one of his raunchy jokes that I can't repeat here. And I got to have my picture taken with him. At that point, I decided I wasn't going to pass up all these great opportunities I'd had. So, and then the Admiral's buddy wanted his picture taken, so he swiped the cigar. I never got to keep that. Otherwise, it'd be framed in my room. And then during the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the end of the war in the Pacific, Bob Hope was the Grand Marshal for the parade, and I was the guy who got to do not just the stubby pencil work, but also the guy who got to go out to the airport and meet him and squire him around a little bit, and that was quite a thrill. I'd seen him in '83 when he came through to do a show for the Marines in Beirut, and was just the guy doing the stubby pencil work. I didn't get to I got to meet him briefly, but it was my boss that got to squire him around. So that was quite a thrill. Good times. It was 1983. The boss was on leave, and I was the assistant public affairs officer of the U.S. 6th Fleet in Gaeta, Italy, and I didn't have a phone at the house. So I had to I carried a beeper, and the folks on the ship knew that, and so when the beeper went off, it was really bad news. And it was 4 o'clock on Sunday morning, the beeper went off. I said, this is not going to be good. And I had a series of pay phones between me and the ship that I tried to hit. And every one of them, interestingly enough, that morning, every one of them had been vandalized somewhere or another. So I finally got to the last phone in the series, and they said, a bomb's gone off at the Marine barracks in Beirut. We've got 6 people dead. And I knew it wasn't going to be just 6. And so I reported to the ship, and it was just me and a couple of my troops who were trying to find out what was going on in Beirut, relay that to our higher headquarters in London, and also make sure that it got back to Washington, D.C. so that the President and the Secretary of Defense could say the right things and be accurate about what they passed along to the American public. The Chief of Staff never let my boss go on leave again. I don't understand why that happened, but as you all may recall, 284 Marines lost their life that day. And so for the next 3 or 4 days, it was pretty nonstop action. Good times, I remember those and relish them. The not so good times, I remember them as well, but I don't relish them quite as much.
I certainly can't top that one, but a little military anecdote that you might find interesting. I had an occasion back in civilian life as president of the American Alumni Council, and I was at Tulane University in New Orleans making a presentation to Tulane University, and it was their homecoming. And they were playing Navy that day, and the Navy and the Army and everybody brought, they had their bands, they had everybody involved. It was a political situation. And seated on the rostrum with me on my right was Admiral Zumwalt, who was the top admiral who was the first admiral in charge of a nuclear submarine. And on my left was the Secretary of the Air Force. And I don't say that in name dropping, but the Secretary of the Air Force said, "Oh, Ball State," said, "do you know General Persley?" Well, I said, "Yes, I do know Bob Persley. I went to school with him." Well, I was impressed that the Secretary of the Air Force knew the background of his generals, to where he knew where he did his undergraduate degree. So what I'm saying is, you never know as you go through life who you better be making friends with and knowing about it. So that's my story.
Well, I think one of the things that, just as an anecdote that comes to the forefront, when I went to Ma Benning School for Boys in 1973 was my first experience with international troops. We had several Saudi princes who were probably either there or not there now that were in my class. We had people from Asia, and we had one little guy named Go from Hong Kong. And his background really didn't lead him real well to field work. When you think of Hong Kong, the size of it, naturally, it's not like anything else. He got to be assigned into my section, and we were a bunch of old Indiana farm boys that hunted all our lives, and he got the benefit of that knowledge, except for one day when he was off kind of away from the group, and he reaches down and he goes, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." Skunk. So we got to educate him on a little bit of tomato juice for a bath, and we didn't let him ride in our truck going back.
As we're talking here, I alluded earlier that my career was sort of dual pointed, one with the foreign area and Russian-related activities, and the other one as a straight field artilleryman. So I want to tell 2 stories. The most recent one, and I already talked about the inspections that are going on, and when we conducted the Inf Inspections at a remote location, secret location in Russia in 1989, I happened to head up this team, and as I say, not unlike what's going on now, through all kinds of formalities, you end up at a secret location in the middle of nowhere. This particular base that we were on, from our intelligence, had in fact been an active SS-5 intermediate silo missile base in the middle of Russia. The Russians were insistent that there no longer were any missiles at this particular base. And I pretended I how do I know that? Prove it to me. Well, the only way you could prove it is to open up a silo, as a matter of fact, and go into a silo. Well, I said, let's do it. And so we had the Russians actually, this was a silo that is closed, was inactive, had been for a while, was sealed, welded shut. And I remember when they finally had to cut it open and open this thing, and they said it could be very dangerous to go in this thing because the gases that accumulate over the years and so forth and so on. So they didn't want the U.S. inspectors to be the first ones down. So they found and I should say not a volunteer, but they found a young Russian soldier where they literally tied a rope around, gave a flashlight, and dropped him down the silo to see. And the silo, when you open one up, you actually go down 20, 30 feet, then you go off, and that's where the actual missile would be, and there's a separate silo there. So this guy wasn't suspended in the middle of nowhere, but he was dropped in this thing with the idea that if he was okay, he would tug on the rope, and then the rest of us could come down. If he didn't tug on the rope, well, then we weren't going down. So, in this particular case, yeah, he tugged, and eventually several of us climbed down into a Russian silo, and he ended up looking, into what at one time housed a intermediate range missile, and throwing rocks down into an empty silo. So that was sort of interesting, an experience that I would not have had I not been in the Army. One of the field artillery things I think of, and I was going to sketch it here, but picture this, because it's already been mentioned, Vietnam's a strange place, a strange war. Some of the lessons learned, I'm sure, will be only applicable to another Vietnam and never again. But if you are familiar at all or studied it, I was located in the 3rd Military Region, and I was the S3 of a battalion for about 6 months, and then the assistant S3 for the Field Artillery Group for the remainder of my tour, that particular. Well, Cu Chi is in the 3rd Military Region, a name you probably heard in history books, and then Tay Ninh up on the Cambodian border where our fire support bases were. To get to one location, from Cu Chi to Tay Ninh and then to the fire support bases, you literally traveled on an open road in the middle of a jungle. And one significant location, as I recall, is a mountain that was called Nui Ba Din. I never forgot that. That translates to Black Virgin. It's a very significant mountain, pronounced piece of terrain in the middle of Vietnam, the 3rd Military Region. Has a very famous temple, actually, not very far from it. And this is a very large mountain with jungle all around it. The U.S. Army actually had a signal group on top of the mountain that we dropped in with a helicopter, but the base of the mountain was VC infiltrated. So, and as you were traveling, going up north, you literally had to drive around the road and then go north, east, or west as you go around this mountain. And the idea was that we know there were VC there, but if you didn't bother them, they didn't bother you. So the idea was, as we were doing our transportation and going back and forth, leave them alone. Well, there was a young lieutenant colonel, I recall, who wanted to go down in history and decided, no, let's do something about these guys. We know they're there, so let's do a fire support raid into the jungle where these guys are housed. And a number of us tried to, I was a major at the time, tried to advise the colonel that that probably wasn't a wise thing to do because we're not sure what kind of results we would have, but I could almost guarantee what would happen after that. But he decided to go ahead and do this, and we fired some artillery rounds and so forth. And for the next few days after that, every convoy that tried to go up north, 1 or 2 trucks blew up as a result of an ambush until we reestablished the status quo. So a weird war. By the way, that lieutenant colonel was subsequently relieved from duty, not for that particular thing, but for other such decisions. So I share those two with you.
The anecdote I'd like to relate is, I think you find rather humorous. I said that I went to jump school at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and and that's near Clarksville, Tennessee. We used to go in to Clarksville on Saturday night, as most GIs have a custom to do, and have a couple of beers, and we'd been in this little pub drinking a couple of beers. A friend of mine from Crawfordville, Indiana, named Harry, and we'd gotten just a little bit inebriated, and we decided, well, it's time to go back to post now, and we were walking down the street, and we went by this tattoo parlor. And Harry looked in, and he saw this big tattoo there. It says, 11th Airborne Division. Then it had a parachute, and then on the bottom end of the parachute was a pair of jump boots. And right below that was a little scroll that says, Born to Raise Hell. And he said, oh, Ron, he said, I got to have one of those tattoos. He said, what do you think? I said, you go first. So we went in the tattoo parlor. This was about midnight. And Harry sat down, and he put his arm out there, and the tattooer started buzzing around on his arm and putting his ink in there, and I saw these little droplets of blood coming out, and the guy would wipe off the blood, and I sobered up pretty fast. And so anyway, Harry got his tattoo, and he said, okay, it's your turn, Ron. I said, well, Harry, I said, thinking it over, I think I'm going to buy one of those. There's a ring over there that says 11th Airborne. I'm going to buy that. And I said, next week, it's getting late. I'm going to come back. And, that got me out of it, and we left. Well, needless to say, I never got back to that tattoo parlor. And Harry and I we spent the next 3.5 years or so then together as buddies, really close, tight buddies. And when we came back to Indiana after we got out of the Army, I came to Ball State University, and my friend Harry went to the Indiana State Police School. And he wanted to become a state trooper, which he did do. Well, it was about maybe 10 years after that, Harry invited me down to go out with him on his squad car. He was stationed down at Greencastle, Indiana, and Interstate, I think it's 64 goes through there maybe, pretty heavily traveled interstate. And his duty was to patrol that section of the interstate. And he said, well, come out and ride with me in my cruiser. I said, well, that'd be great. So it was in the evening, I think on a Saturday evening, and we were sitting alongside the road with his radar gun on, and this car came down through there about 90 miles an hour, and Harry he turns on his siren, goes out on the interstate, and he pulls his car over. And it was this little lady, about 70 years old. She had that thing, I mean, she must have been going at least, I don't know, I forget exactly what the speed was, but it was over 80 miles an hour. And Harry, it was in the summertime, and Harry had his short sleeve shirt on, and put his arm out on her window and said, now, man, you really shouldn't go that fast, you shouldn't speed. And she looked at his arm and said, 11th Airborne Division, born to raise hell. An Indiana State Trooper with a tattoo like that really didn't go over too well. And she asked him, she says, well, if you were born to raise hell, why are you pulling me over on the interstate? And I forget what Harry told her, but you have to be careful. Some of these traps you can fall into when you're in the military and actually have too many beers. Okay. That's the end of my anecdote.
I've got a couple of things that I've thought about that I want to share. One of the traits you want to have as an officer is have a sense of humor. I'll tell you what, not only your men women would appreciate that, but your superiors will. It'll get you far, it really will. Don't take it so serious that you're on the edge all the time and you're trying too hard. I mean, what I said earlier certainly still goes. You want to learn everything you can. You've got to hone your skills. But have a sense of humor. I remember a funny little story that happened to me. I was on my way back to Vietnam from Hawaii. I'd taken a 7-day R&R in Hawaii. And at the time, I was base defense. I was in charge of base defense for Phuc Vinh, which was the 1st Air Cav Division forward headquarters. And it was a captain's job, but I was a first lieutenant. Anyway, that's what I got. That was my last few months in Vietnam. I took off to Hawaii, and I was working for a lieutenant colonel, and he was there when I left. When I got back from R&R, I decided to take a couple extra days. I really had a lot of fun in Hawaii, and I wasn't in a real big hurry to get back to Phuc Vinh. So I messed around for a couple days, and I got back a few days late. Well, I got back to Phuc Vinh and found out I had a new boss, and my new boss's name was Lieutenant Colonel Carl Bono. And I reported to him, and I said, Lieutenant Mann reporting, sir. He said, Lieutenant Mann, where in the hell have you been? And I was kind of intimidated a little bit, and I said, well, sir, I'll tell you. And I started going through the whole thing. He said, that's enough. He said, that's okay. Let's get to work now. And at that point, I respected him for jumping on me for being late, but at the same time, he also recognized that, you know, we do things like that sometimes. He pretty much excused it. He said, let's get to work. And when he said, let's get to work, he meant it. He was my mentor for the rest of my time in the Army. And Lieutenant Colonel Bono was a very knowledgeable guy, and he was a very people-oriented person. He taught me a lot. He actually created a love for the Army that I had, not at that point particularly, but later on. And Lieutenant Colonel Bono wanted me to stay in the Army. He said he would get me a regular Army commission. And if you know a regular Army commission, the only thing that's differentiated between the commission you get in ROTC and OCS is it's a reserve commission. Well, regular Army commission is very important if you want to be a career officer in the military. And I turned it down. I thought I wanted to come back to Ball State, finish my last year and be in the corporate scene. Looking back, I probably made a big mistake because as I look back, I also learned some things. A few years back, I learned that Lieutenant Colonel Carl Bono actually became Army Chief of Staff in the 80s. And then he's president of a large company in Washington, D.C. called MPI. And I've had some contact with his secretary. I hope to see him one day. I'd love to work for him again. But Colonel Bono, General Bono, typified to me what a field grade officer was all about. He could communicate, he could teach. He was just a true gentleman and a tremendous leader. And I really appreciate that experience. I mean, that's just time and place. I had no idea, I had no control over that. But you know, a lot of things will happen to you in your career. And what could happen is, you might decide along the way that you're not just using this as a way to get a college degree and then go out and work in a corporation somewhere. Because I'll tell you right now, working in the corporation isn't all it's cracked up to be. And I could go through and expound on that for the next hour or so. I'm not going to do it. But the military has a lot of advantages. And you have a lot of variety that you can take advantage of if that's what you want to do. You can do the travel and so forth. So I am very pro-military, and I think it's something that you may not be able to answer that question today, but somewhere along the line, once you get your feet wet and you've been in some situations where you are a commissioned officer, you might decide that it's for you. And you know, I hope certainly if you decide that, then you proceed along that career path, because it's a wonderful career. It's what you make of it. That's all.
Well, you know, you're thinking about your situation with the German language and all that. When I got back, I could speak fairly well. At this point, I've lost most of it. But if you are someplace for a fairly good period of time, I would strongly advise you, if the Army offers the classes, take the language classes and begin to learn what some of the people are like. I have an interesting incident along those lines. I had just barely begun learning German. And I was out with some of my buddies in town, and there was a shop that had, I don't even remember what it was now, something interesting I thought would be kind of fun to send home as a gift. And I'm going to go find out about that. And he said, oh, don't talk to him, don't talk to him. He doesn't speak any English, he doesn't want to deal with GIs. So I went in, and very haltingly spoke German to him. He came back perfectly good English. It was, you know, as long as I was willing to come part way, he'd be willing to come the rest of the way. And I think a lot of places around the world you're going to find that to be true. One incident that comes to mind also, for a while I was assigned to be the chaplain's chauffeur. And this one time he got a call from one of the mess halls that they were having an inspection and they had too much stuff. They had more than they were allocated. So he got a call, they hooked up the trailer, loaded the trailer up with cartons of milk, cans of food, bags of dry goods stuff that were over the amount that he was supposed to have on board, and we took it to an orphanage. And I'll never forget the expressions on the faces of the staff and on the kids when we brought that stuff. I mean, it was like Christmas. And that was you know, a wonderful thing. Some of the little things beyond your regular duties that are things that will bring the memories and that will make a difference.
Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come and visit with us. And share your stories with us. And always, this is an open invitation for you to come back to any of our classes. We teach freshman through senior, and we do want you all to participate as we mentor and shape future leaders. So the door is always open for you all to come. So let's give them a round of applause and thank them.